Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Dan Wickline Show. Yeah, I realize I didn't promote this one either because again, wasn't really sure I was going to do a show. I know. I got to get my shit together. Got to make it official. Love to get a co-host again, but we'll see how that works out. I get a co-host and it kind of becomes Pop Go the Writers again. So, I don't know. Maybe a rotating co-host or guest or something. We'll have to see how that goes. I take suggestions, by the way. If you guys have any, please feel free to throw some my way. What are we talking about tonight? Well, talk about the passing of a couple actors, and then hit upon something earlier this week. Thinking about Kill Bill and Superman, and that speech Bill gives during the movie about Superman, and how it doesn't quite ring true to me anymore. But we'll get to that. I want to start off by talking about two actors that passed away in the last couple days, and they're very different. Ed, how you doing? Very different on who these guys were in their careers and stuff. One, of course, was English actor Terence Stamp, and the other is Australian actor Tristan Rogers. Now, very different career paths. Terence Stamp was an actor coming up in the 60s and the 70s. He had done a bunch of amazing films. And then, of course, we know him probably best as General Zod in the Superman films. Mr. Dope, how you doing? And, I mean, he made Zod iconic. I don't know if Zod was as iconic in the comics as he was after Terence Stamp and the kneel before Zod. And that happens a lot. You get a character in the comics that is just kind of there, and then something happens outside of the medium that puts an emphasis on him, and that feeds back into the comics. I can think of the Riddler as one of those characters. The Riddler popped up like 2 or 3 times total before he appeared on the Batman television series in 1966. He was not that big a character. He was not someone anybody cared about. He was in 2 issues in the Golden Age, and then he popped up again in the 60s. One of the writers decided to use him again, and that happened to be one of the comics that Green, I'm forgetting names, Jim Beard, he would know all this top of the head, but the guy that put William Dozer, when he was putting together the Batman's television series, he had his assistant go out and buy a bunch of comics, and one of those comics happened to be the one that brought back the Riddler for the first time in like 15 years. And he liked the character, he liked the story idea, and that became the pilot episode of Batman. And if Frank Gorshin hadn't put such life into the Riddler, he probably wouldn't have ever really appeared again in the comics. You know, he just kind of grew from his appearance on television and then kind of fed back into it. And that happened with a lot of characters. Mr. Freeze was another one. He wasn't even called Mr. Freeze in his first appearance. He was Mr. Zero. And then he became Mr. Freeze. And in the comics, or in the TV show, he got more appearances. And then they kind of fed him in the comics. So, and then you have other characters like King Tut, who was never even in the comics. Or you go to the animated series, that really gave Mr. Freeze a backstory, was the animated series. Harley Quinn was created in the animated series. Jimmy Olsen was created, and Perry White, I believe, were created in the radio programs. And that fed back into the Superman comics. So I don't know if Zod was that important of a character until he showed up in Superman. I'd have to double check that one. That's more just a gut feeling. But I'm sure that the level of importance of Zod grew because of Terrence Stamp. And then he went on to play Chancellor Valorum, I think it is, in The Phantom Menace. So, I mean, he was in Superman and Star Wars. And then he came back and voiced Jor-El, of all people, in Smallville. So, yeah, Terrence Stamp, a great, great actor. And diverse, too. I mean, he was in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. He was in, I think one of those films called Billy Boyd. I mean, just amazing, amazing stuff. Anthony says, Dan, I read somewhere where Jimmy Olsen and Perry White were supposed to be over-the-top portrayals of Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite. Huh. I could believe that about Perry White, but Jimmy Olsen was hard to see that one. Not saying that's not the case, but yeah. Have to think about that one. So yeah, Terrence Stamp passed away today at like 87, I think. And I'm doing this off the cuff. I didn't put my notes together. And then the other guy, Tristan Rogers. Now, a lot of you probably don't know who Tristan Rogers is, unless you're my age. And you grew up with an older sister, or your mother was a stay-at-home mom, and you got home from school right around 2 o'clock, and the TV was turned on to General Hospital. Tristan Rogers played Robert Scorpio and was part of the Luke and Laura phenomenon that was on General Hospital. And my sister watched this when we got home. My sister was 7 years older than me. So I'd get home from school, and of course, General Hospital would be on. And I'd sit down in the living room and play with my toys or look at the comics and stuff. But the show was on. And, it gets to you. And what's funny is a lot of people are like, oh, soap operas? No. But then you look at comic books, and there's so many similar tropes between soap operas and comic books. I mean, television soap operas are like weekly or monthly comic books in a way. They're just daily television shows that have cliffhanger endings, page turns, all that kind of stuff. And they really lean into that stuff. So if there were superheroes in it, I don't think anybody would notice a difference. And you look at some of the TV shows like Smallville and Arrow and stuff like that. Yeah, they have a lot of action and fighting and stuff, but relationship-wise, they're very soap operatic. Yeah, we'll go with that term. So it's not that far-fetched that somebody could grow up reading comic books and watching soap operas. And especially if you have an older sister or like I said, your mother was a stay-at-home mother and you grew up with this stuff on. And I need to look up a name real quick. Who played? I just remember the first name, but I want to get this one. I didn't have to fill that one all the way out. People knew. Anthony Geary. Okay. So this is my General Hospital story. And again, Tristan Rogers was great on that show. But it made me think of this thing that happened to me in high school. Wait, Anthony says, why did Marvel and DC focus on vampires and werewolves and twisted zombies, but you really saw mummies in DC or Marvel? Mainly because mummies aren't as unique in horror. Mummies are very specific to Egypt and that culture, because that's who did mummifications. Now you could probably come up with other ways to do it, but a mummy really isn't that different than a zombie. So you do a zombie and you get to do all of this stuff. You have a mummy, it's very specific to Egyptian culture or that area. So that's the only reason I could think of they would stay away from it. All right, so I'm in high school and I was a theater kid. You may not be able to tell that. But Yeah, my football coach hated that. I was a theater kid and I was a band kid for a while. And when I decided to go full theater, both the band teacher or the band leader and the football coaches were upset. So band because I played the sousaphone, the big tuba that wrapped around. I was big enough to hold it and could play it. Anyway, and one of the things we would do is we would have an opportunity to go see TV shows that needed an audience or plays that were doing performances to get an audience reaction. We were seat fillers, but we were paid seat fillers. They would get like $20 a kid or $50 a kid, whatever it was. I don't remember. And one of the things we got to do was go down and see a play that was doing a dress rehearsal, and they wanted to have a small audience. And the play starred Anthony Geary. Anthony, of course, played Luke Spencer on General Hospital. Just for you Star Trek fans, Laura is Jeannie Francis, who, Luke and Laura. And Jeannie Francis, of course, is the longtime wife of Jonathan Frakes, Commander Riker from Star Trek. So this all kind of stays in the pop culture nomenclature. Anyway, so I go down to this theater with, and I want to think it was the Amundsen or something. It was one of those down in LA. And we went to see this play, and it was a very weird play. It was about a cult leader or a terrorist leader, but, it wasn't a racial thing. This was just, they were trying to make a statement about something or other. And Anthony Geary played the head of this group. And through it, he's dressed, dress shirt. He has got a shoulder holster on and a gun in the shoulder holster. And they go through this whole performance. And I'm watching this. And at one point, I see he takes out the gun and plays with it a little bit. And then he tucks it into the small of his back. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why would he do that? He's got a shoulder. Why would he just put it back in the holster? Why would he suddenly put it at the small of his back? And then a little while later, he's dealing with one of his disciples, and he knows that he has to eliminate her. And he brings her in for a hug, and she relaxes, and then he reaches around to the small of his back, pulls out the gun, and shoots her. Answering my question, because if he was hugging her, he couldn't draw from the holster. So afterwards, everybody came out and did a Q&A. And all the actors came out, and Anthony Geary came out and sat on the stage. And he's, they're asking questions. I went, Mr. Geary, why does your character know that he's going to kill that girl and how he's going to kill it? Because otherwise, why would he take the gun out of his shoulder holster and put it in the small of his back? Because at that point, we don't know that he's going to kill her. But was this pre-planned, or because that doesn't really fit with the story? Yeah, I was that kind of kid. Anthony Geary slaps his leg, goes, son of a... Gets up, turns to the stage, to the director, and goes, I told you people would notice. We have to do something different. And the director's like, oh, okay. We'll figure it out. And I thought, oh God, I got him upset. I'm sorry. And my teacher gives me a dirty look like, what are you doing? We're here as guests. And I'm like, I just was asking a question. Well, maybe Anthony noticed that. But after the Q&A was done, he hopped off the stage, came up to me and said, thank you, gave me a hug, and then said, I have been trying to get them to change that for like 2 weeks now, but they insisted that nobody would notice. And he went back, and I'm like, that was cool. That was cool. So that was my Anthony Geary story. And yes, I grew up watching General Hospital. And I am sad that Tristan Rogers has passed away, and I'm sad that Terrence Stamp has passed away. So my condolences to both of them, their family, their loved ones, their friends, and their fans. Okay, Anthony says, The way I found out about Terrence was not because of his TV or movie work. He was a major part of my childhood when it came to video games. He was the voice of Act in the Halo series and Elder Scrolls. Yes, he was also a prolific voice actor. So, yeah, great voice. Just absolutely great. I think that's why Zod works so well. That kneel before Zod, you know? Yeah. So, all right, we're going to shift gears here. And I'm going to talk about this real revelation I had during the week. Now, you guys remember when Kill Bill came out, Quentin Tarantino movie. The second one had David Carradine in it. And there's a scene where he's talking to the bride, Bill. And he talks about Superman. And I'm going to read you the actual lines because they were pretty, I don't know, pretty influential at the time. And this is what Bill said. Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent. His outfit with the big red S, that's the blanket he was wrapped in as a baby when the Kents found him. Those are his clothes. When Kent wears the glasses, the business suit, that's the costume. That's the costume Superman wears to blend in with us. Clark Kent is how Superman views us. And what are the characteristics of Clark Kent? He's weak. He's unsure of himself. He's unsure of himself. He's a coward. Clark Kent is Superman's critique on the whole human race. Now, that's the second part where it's a critique on the human race. I never thought that was Superman. But the idea that Superman is Superman and Clark Kent's the act, it worked for me in the same way that Batman is Batman and Bruce Wayne is the act. But I don't see that anymore. And I don't see that because of what James Gunn did. It is a very different interpretation of what we normally get from Superman. Because even in the Christopher Reeves movie, we got Superman and then we got the bumbling Clark Kent. And there really wasn't anything in between. Even when we saw him in Lois's apartment when he was going to tell her, and he went from clinched over Clark to Superman and then back to Clark again, there really wasn't that, I don't know, middle step. And that's what I see in this movie, in the new Superman movie. Superman, Clark Kent is an act. He tussles his hair, he puts on the glasses, he's a little bumbly, and of course they don't do it as much in this movie, which I appreciate. I don't think they needed to do it as campy as they did originally. You know, he's supposed to just be non-assuming. He's supposed to be someone that when you look at, you go, yeah, he's not Superman. And not because, oh, he's an idiot or he's a klutz. It's just, you wouldn't think of him that way. You wouldn't think of him as heroic. He's non-assuming. And Superman, though, at least in this movie, is a facade as well. And we see that in the speech he gives near the end of the film, when Lex calls him a stupid alien. And he says, You've gotten me wrong all this time, Lex. I'm as human as anybody. I have fears, I have hopes. And he goes on this thing about how he's not sure of what he's doing, but he still gets out there and does it. And to me, that's Clark Kent. That's the real person. You know, he's got the moral fibers that his adoptive parents weaved into him. He's got what he believed the Kryptonians wanted. Don't get me started on the Kryptonian message. But he's still unsure of himself. He's still trying to figure things out. But he's a first responder. And again, this was the other realization I had watching Superman, is Batman's the world's greatest detective. Green Lantern is a cosmic policeman. Superman is the world's greatest firefighter. He's the world's greatest first responder. He's the guy that shows up and not only saves you, but reassures you. He's going to tell you that it's going to be okay. He's going to tell you to just take a breath, long, slow, deep breaths, like he did with the woman on the roof. He's the guy that's going to save the squirrel or save the dog. That's what he does. He's the first responder. He's there to make everything better, to deal with the crisis and get us through it. And how would that be if he showed up, looked around, went, oh, hell, what am I going to do? We'd have no confidence in him. That wouldn't reassure us. But he comes in and he portrays that confidence. He portrays that things are going to be fine. I'm going to fix things. Things are going to get better. Even when he doesn't feel that. Now, maybe he gets that way over time, but he feels, he presents that. So Superman is a facade, and the reporter Clark Kent is a facade. But in this movie, we see the real guy. We see all his hesitations and his fears and his hopes and what bugs him, what gets to him. The super shit hashtag. That Lois could literally push his buttons and get him upset. That the message from his parents really hurt him and made him question everything. And it was Jonathan that got him turned around. That's the guy that's the real person. Okay? I don't think Clark Kent is an indictment on humanity any more than I think that Superman itself is the ideal. I think it's what he puts on to do what he has to do. And I think that is what makes this movie really good, is it shows us all of those sides. And if you think that's a stretch, just think about your own life. Think about the people in your life. It would be great if we were all the same person all the time. But you go into work and you're a little bit different than you are at home. When you're by yourself, you're a little bit different than you are with your kids or with your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your parents. You're a little bit different. There's a little bit of, everybody has a little bit of facade they put on. You're going out with your best friends, you try to be the cool guy. You want to be the cool person. So you put that facade on. So I think it's good to finally see a little more depth to the character of Superman to make him a little more relatable. And I think that's why I think this film is doing well with the critics and stuff like that. And of course, everybody is comparing it to Man of Steel. And there are people who absolutely love Zack Snyder. There are the Snyder Bros. And then there are people who just like that. And that's their Superman. And some of them have never seen any other Superman. They don't read the comics. And they didn't see Christopher Reeves. They didn't see Brandon Routh. They didn't watch Smallville. So for them, Superman is Henry Cavill. And they see this other version, this more human side, and they don't like it, and they stand against it. And you know what? Okay, that's fine. That's your thing. But for people that grew up with the comics and the characters and seeing them all these years and seeing Christopher Reeves and all this other stuff, there's more depth to the character. Henry Cavill was a good Superman. He just didn't have a good script. There wasn't enough depth. There wasn't enough time as Clark or as he was one note. He was that same character throughout. And here we get to see more humanity, more depth to the character. I keep using the word depth, but so yeah, that's my thought on that. I think where Kill Bill brings up a good point, I don't think it's quite right because Superman doesn't portray Clark as bumbling. A doesn't play Clark as bumbling because that's his indictment of humanity. He plays him to be non-assuming. He plays him to keep from anybody looking at him thinking he's Superman. And it works well. Batman doesn't play Bruce Wayne as a foppish playboy because he thinks that's what people are. He does that because, again, it's to keep people so far away from what he's really doing. So again, those aren't indictments on humanity. It's just going as far away from their true selves as possible. So, all right, let me catch up here with Anthony. He says, this is where I kind of disagree with you. I believe Superman is sort of an indictment on humanity and the idolization of false idols instead of trying to fix the problems themselves, Dan. An indictment of humanity and the idolization of false idols. Now, see, that I think is Snyder's approach. I think that is where Snyder came from. And that is also, in a way, putting Superman in as a Christ-like figure, which is something Snyder did. But he was never meant to be a Christ-like figure. He was more of an allegory for Moses in a way. If you think about it, Superman was created by two Jewish creators. The character was meant to be, in a way, a Jewish allegory, which, if you look at the story of Moses and him being sent off down the river and all that stuff and leading people to the promised land and keeping people, Superman is more of a Moses figure than a Christ figure when you are looking at it that way. So I see what you're talking about, Anthony, and I think that there have been writers who specifically have tried to work that angle. And it's not a bad angle to work. And they've told some great stories that way. But I don't think that's at the heart of what Siegel and Schuster wanted to do with the character. If you look at, I believe it was Jerry Siegel, a lot of this came from the fact that his father had been murdered. And he was trying to make sense of a lot of that and make somebody who couldn't be shot, make a hero that couldn't be shot, that couldn't be hurt, a certain level of invulnerability to the point where they had to start adding stuff to make him vulnerable. So, again, the character of Superman has been multiple times used as a Christ allegory, but I don't think that's necessarily where the creators first intended it for it to go. And again, but that is definitely what Zack Snyder leaned into. So nothing wrong. I mean, I'm curious, Anthony. What is your background with Superman? Were you a reader before? I mean, what is? Did you read the comics? Or are you more of a modern day? I don't know your age or anything, so I don't know, Anthony. So, like I said, I'm curious if but yeah, Man of Steel definitely makes Superman a Christ allegory. So, Dan, he says also, Dan, why is it Superman suffers from this more than any other superhero? You don't see that with Batman. You don't see that with Hulk. You don't see that with Captain America or Iron Man. I think because, again, how he's been portrayed in modern times has made him that godlike figure. But again, I don't think he was necessarily supposed to be. That wasn't what Siegel and Schuster were trying to do. But in the comics, they didn't give him a weakness. You can get on Stan Lee, the whole Stan Lee, Jack Kirby debate stuff. But one of the things Stan Lee did with just about every hero he created was he gave them a weakness. He made them human. He gave them fallacies. There was something, Iron Man had a heart. Spider-Man had his Aunt May. Everybody had a weakness to humanize them. And Superman never did. Superman, Kryptonite wasn't part of Superman for the longest time. It was when writers started going, this guy can't get beat. How do we do this? That they started introducing stuff like Kryptonite and things like that. So, and it also is why they started Lois Lane. The other thing we see in the new Superman movie is at no point is Lois Lane in danger. The closest she gets to danger is when her and Mr. Terrific go to that military base to go into the portal. And it's not Superman protecting her, it's Mr. Terrific. She's not a damsel in distress in this movie. She's not girl hostage. You look at Superman comics for a long time, and even the Superman movies, Lois Lane is constantly being kidnapped or put into the wet line of danger, and Superman has to save her. And she becomes a liability for him that that his enemies start taking advantage of. That's not the case here. So that just the Superman that Zack Snyder wanted to do is different than the Superman James Gunn is doing. And it's different flavors of the same character. So it's no different than a different writer coming into the comic and taking the character in a different direction. But Superman is a tough character to write because of how powerful he is. You have to create these insane level villains. So, you put him in the Justice League, there's not really a reason to have anybody else there. Is there a reason for Batman to be on the Justice League compared to Superman? Yeah. Oh, well, Batman's the master strategist. That's why he's there. They justify that. They have to justify all this stuff to put him around Superman, where James Gunn simply came in and said, he's not the god. He's just human. He's very powerful, but he's not omnipotent. He's not all powerful. And that makes it a much more interesting character to me. You know, might change for you guys. I don't know. Let's see. Anthony says, I'm not sure if this is true, but I was watching an interview with Penn Oswald and Jerry Seinfeld about Jerry Seinfeld said kryptonite was an after the fact invention because of radios. Yes. Yeah, I didn't remember for sure if it was created in the radios, but I believe it was. So yeah. They needed something to bring him down because writers just kept making him more powerful. He was moving planets. Oh, that was interesting. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, they needed something to bring him back down, and kryptonite was the answer. All right. Anthony says, was popular, and they had to find a way to allow the voice actor of Superman to go on vacation, so they created kryptonite. Oh, I hadn't heard that part, but that's interesting. And let's see, Dan, I don't believe Clark and Superman is a simpleton or an idiot. I think he's super intelligent. I just think he's so naive to the world, thinking he can fix everything and be everywhere at once. I'm going to disagree with you there. I don't think he thinks he can be everywhere and fix everything. I think he wants to. I think he needs to. So I don't think it's naivete. I think he genuinely wants to save everybody. So I don't think he thinks he can, because he knows he is limited. He knows he has issues that that will make it impossible. Kryptonite is one of them, but he can't be everywhere at once. He can't stop, he couldn't figure out how to stop the kaiju and keep it alive. But he was trying to, because that's Superman. Mr. Terrific comes in and goes, nope, blow the thing up. So, and I think that's the key, is that to write Superman well, you need to be able to write a relatable character. And I think that's why Superman gets the grief that the other characters don't. Because, I mean, they were saying all of this about Captain America. When Marvel decided they were going to do a Captain America story, everybody's like, well, nobody's going to care about Captain America. He's outdated. His beliefs don't matter anymore. He's all red, white, and blue, and that's not a thing anymore. And then they came out and they gave us a character that was morally the captain. It wasn't the doctrine he believed in. It was the sense of right and wrong. He didn't like bullies. It's not he believed USA was better than the Nazis. It's he saw that the Nazis were wrong. And Captain America knew in the comics, they started doing that sometimes the U.S. government was wrong. So that's how they made him more relatable, is they gave us a character that didn't just salute the flag and say, yes, sir, whatever the president said. And with Superman, it's kind of the same thing. You've got to humanize him. You've got to give... If you're going to tell a story, you need to make it relatable. One of the hardest to relate characters in literary history is Sherlock Holmes. He's brilliant. He is so brilliant that he has to do drugs when he's bored to keep from going crazy. How do you get a reader to identify with that, to connect with that? You don't. You tell the story from Dr. Watson's point of view and the awe of working with Sherlock Holmes, that he doesn't understand it, so you don't have to understand it. Sherlock explains it to Watson so that he can explain it to us without making the reader feel stupid because Watson didn't understand it. Watson's a doctor and a military man. He should be great, and this was still beyond him, so it's fine. It's okay, I didn't get it. So you've got to find a way to connect to a character. And I think that's what James Gunn did. It was hard to relate to Henry Cavill's Superman. You know? I mean, and it was interesting for one movie, but then in the rest of the times we see him, again, he's just this powerful figure. He's not even in most of the Justice League, and then he just shows up and kicks everybody's ass. So, okay. Anthony says, more overconfidence than naive. And says, he clings to the memory that he was sent here to make a difference, so he feels like it's his job and he misses something. He takes it as a failure. And yeah, exactly. It's not that he thinks he can. It's to think he should. And that's why he beats himself up if he fails. Anthony says, does Superman have a storyline in the comics similar to what you see with Cap, where Steve basically loses faith in the American government and goes out on his own as a character like Nomad? They touch on that in a series called For Tomorrow. It's written by Brian Azzarello and drawn by Jim Lee. It's a 12-issue series. And it's not that it's just that people start disappearing and he cannot stop it. And he gets involved in wars that the U.S. government doesn't want him to because he's trying to make up for the fact that he can't stop people from disappearing. So he's going to try to save everybody. It's a really interesting story. It didn't get a lot of attention it did when it came out, because it came out shortly after Hush. It was the storyline Jim Lee did after Hush, but it didn't click on all cylinders like Hush did. But For Tomorrow is that book, and it's available in trade, and it's available. So you do get that kind of story. It's not that he puts on a different costume or that, but it's the choices he makes. He spends time talking to a priest who's dying of cancer. Yeah. Zod's in it. There's that's the story that does what you're thinking, Anthony. And it says, yep, just like Wilson was always emphasizing to everyone how House was Sherlock Holmes, to the point that, Bryan Singer said that's what he was doing. He named him House because Holmes, House, Wilson, Watson, and his first patient in the very first episode was named Irene Adler. So, it's not even slightly hidden allegory for Sherlock Holmes. It is full on blatant in your face. It says, Anthony, if you've never read Superman Red Son, give it a try. Oh, there's another good example, Red Son, where he's raised in Russia and becomes a member of the Soviet Union. So that, in a way, does it too. Okay, didn't like that one. I'll tell you the truth. My favorite Superman stories are some of the more straightforward ones. I am not a huge fan of All-Star Superman. And part of it is, and this could kind of get some backlash, I'm not a big fan of Frank Quitely's artwork. I have mad respect for Frank Quitely. He's an incredibly talented artist. His work is really well done. His style doesn't click with me. And there's other artists that are that way too. I will, no disrespect to them. And that's the thing about art is there are artists you like and artists you don't like. So I did not enjoy that. And I'm not a big, is it Alan Moore or Grant Morrison who wrote All Star? I think it's Grant Morrison. I'm not a big Grant Morrison guy either. He always takes the characters to these extreme places that I don't know if I enjoy. So, but Superman Birthright is a great Superman story. That's Mark Waid and Leinil Yu kind of retelling the character. Again, For Tomorrow. I love John Byrne's take it on the Man of Steel books. I thought that was a great run as well. So, but I didn't grow up a Superman guy because, again, the reason was he was too powerful. I couldn't relate to the character for a long time. This Superman, James Gunn Superman, is a character I can relate to. It's a character I want to know more about. The John Byrne run is what got me reading Superman comics. Man of Steel, the For Tomorrow run. Yeah, those things. But when Superman is godlike, not my thing. And he says, Dan, why is it that Superman fans specifically have a weird hatred of All-Star Superman, Superman for all seasons? You know what? I don't know if they do. Everything I've seen, people love All-Star Superman and Superman for all seasons. I like Superman for all seasons. I do. Tim Sale is great. Tim Sale, now see, that's the thing. Frank Wiley and Tim Sale are both guys who have very unique art styles. I can get into Tim Sale's. It's not my kind of style, but I can get into it and relax and like it like I did with Long Halloween and Forever for Victory and all those. Just can't get into Frank Wiley's style. I think it's the pouty lips everybody has. I don't know. So for all season, I think is really good. And there is some good parts to the All-Star Superman story. But again, it just felt like I'm a little bummed that some of the best Superman stories feel like Elseworlds. Because a lot of writers can't seem to find a connection to the character. So they take him out of context. They take him out of continuity. Or, where I think that's why I like what James Gunn did, because I think he just gave us Superman, but he gave us Superman we can identify with. So I know I'm kind of beating that horse now, but and this is my favorite comic of all time for either Marvel or DC has always been the Phantom Rider, Carter Slade. Nice. Okay. When somebody comes up and they say their character is something somewhat obscure, I am impressed as hell. Carter Slade is such a great character. I love that he gets a little homage or a little nod in the Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider movie, and we even get the ride across the desert. It's a completely superfluous scene, but it's one of my favorite scenes in that movie. The two of them riding across the desert together. Carter Slade is a great character. I loved when they put him in the West Coast Avengers for a while. So, why is it that the writers for comics can't find a connection to the mainline Superman? So they always tend to do a lot of alternate universe versions of Superman. Well, I think that is because, again, the power level and finding them to be relatable. When you can't relate to a character, it's hard to write that character. Me personally, I never wanted to write magic. Magic was something, I'll tell you the honest truth. Magic was something that I felt I didn't do enough drugs to understand. I hadn't gotten high. I hadn't done any psychedelics. And to me, you needed to do that to really kind of go out there and make these far out comics and stuff like Steve Ditko did, or a friend of mine, Josh Dysart. He did these great, really trippy comics with Swamp Thing and stuff like that. And I always thought, I can't do it. I can't write Dr. Fate. I can't write Doctor Strange. It's outside of my wheelhouse. Hey, Big Bear, good to see you. So I stayed away from those kind of characters. And then I had the opportunity to do this chapter book for this company called Cellar Door. And I was trying to think of something I could do that was unique. At the time, I was big into Nero Wolfe, watching the Timothy Hutton series on A&E, and going back and reading the Rex Stout books. And I loved the relationship between Archie Goodwin and Nero Wolfe. And you look at how most mystery books are done, they take one of the iconic relationships that are introduced in detective. You have your noir detective, like Sam Spade. You have your genius detective, like M. Watson, like Sherlock Holmes, or the Nero Wolfe connection, or you have the unassuming detective like Miss Marple or Hercule Poirot. For me, I found my connection into magic and supernatural with the Nero Wolfe idea because, like Sherlock, I could have Lucius be able to do the magic. Lucius Fogg was my character, the cultist, but that wasn't my character that I wrote. That wasn't the character that I connected to. You connect to Jimmy Doyle, is this private detective who gets hired to be his leg man because Lucius Fogg can't go outside of his house or he'll die instantly. Jimmy is the voice of the character. Jimmy's the writer. It's first-person narrative for Jimmy. We see the world through Jimmy's eyes. And as it progresses, Jimmy starts to learn magic. Jimmy picks up little bits here and there. And that's was my way in, because I could connect to Jimmy more so than I could connect to Lucius. And those became the Lucius Fogg novels I write. But again, I couldn't see how I could connect to Doctor Strange. How am I going to connect to a brilliant physician who, when he loses the ability of his hands, learns the mystic arts? Not me. Got none of that. So you take a character like Superman, how do you identify with somebody who is basically invincible? That other than a really rare mineral that happened to come from deep space, you really can't hurt the guy. Well, you do that by looking at him emotionally. That you don't make him super confident. You give him some doubts. You give him humanity. You make him a human character. So that's the big difference between like Man of Steel and the new Superman movie. Is Superman, James Gunn gave us a Superman we could relate to. Zack Snyder gave us a Christ allegory. He was using him to make statements, which he does in a lot of his, it's kind of his way of storytelling. There's always these invincible characters and stuff like that. Even Rebel Moon, you have the Scargiver, that type of stuff. It's this kind of story Zack Snyder does. And for some people, it works. Some people, that's the Superman they want. Others want a more humanized Superman that they can relate to. So it really depends on telling the story you want to tell. So How do you humanize Superman? How do you make him connectable? Well, for a lot of people, they take the shortcut, just make it a different Superman, give him a different upbringing, give him a different, oh, he was raised in Russia. He was adopted by the Waynes instead of the Kents, that type of thing. And by the way, I've got to say this. I am watching online, and so many people are talking about the message from Krypton and how, oh my God, they're evil. Jor-El is evil. Lara is evil because they wanted Superman to come and take over the planet and, kill people. Yeah. You can absolutely look at it that way. Or you can flip it around. Think about it from a set of parents who are sending their child off as they're about to die in hopes that he's going to live a good life, in hopes that he's going to thrive. They're sending him to a planet where he'll have strength and abilities because of the sun. But they're sending it to a planet that they look at as primitive. We don't know how far back their data on Earth is. Maybe they looked and saw caveman time and don't know how much it's progressed. So they tell him, look, get in there and take over, guide them, or maybe guide them because this is what just happened on Krypton, and teach them not to waste their resources and destroy their planet. So, if you looked at the planet right now, Earth right now, would you send your kid here with the way things are going? Is this where you'd want him to grow up? And if you did and he had the ability to take over, wouldn't you tell him to? Wouldn't you? So, just one of the thoughts. Anthony says, I don't know what it is, but it seems like Marvel tends to write more relatable superheroes than DC for some reason. You've got to remember that they were created at a different time. Most of the DC's main characters were created in the late 30s, early 40s. Then they were kind of revamped in the 50s. So they're, that era. By the time Stan Lee sat down to create with Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and John Romita Jr., Sr., all of those guys to create the Marvel Universe, it was the 60s. It was a different era. It was a different readership. They were writing for college kids. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster were writing for children. Comic books for the 30s, 40s, and 50s were kids' books. They didn't start becoming things that teenagers or college kids read until the 60s. So you've got this legacy of era that is kind of attached. But if you look at the characters after they were rebooted, like you look in the 80s after Crisis on Infinite Earths, they did a better job of making the characters more relatable. But it's that legacy that they still are dealing with. So, and plus Stan Lee, like I said, Stan Lee created Peter Parker and gave him the abilities of Spider-Man. Stan Lee created Reed Richards' Sue Storm and then created the Fantastic Four. Oh, history lesson. Cool. All right, Anthony. Marvel Comics was timely comics in that era. And they created a handful of characters. In the first book called Marvel Comics #1, Submariner and the android Human Torch were created. a character called the Angel, not the one we got now, and an alien called Vision. Later on, a little while later, Captain America be created. Now, those characters are all difficult to relate to, just like most of the DC ones from that era. It wasn't until Martin Goodman saw that DC in the 60s was starting to get sales from Justice League and books like that, that he went to Stan Lee and said, okay, stop with the monster books. Let's do superheroes because that's what's selling. Because that's what Martin Goodman did. Martin Goodman wasn't an innovator. He was a follower who would jump on whatever trend was the big thing. So he got Stan to start doing superhero books, and Stan and Jack and all of them did them in a very 60s way, where DC had already recreated their stuff with Carmine Infantino and Julius Schwartz in the 50s. So that's why they have a 60s tint. That's why there's more depth to them and stuff. But most of the characters that are Marvel are from the 60s. The handful that were created in the 40s that were brought back were all greatly changed. The android torch was thrown out, and we got Johnny Storm instead for the Human Torch. Captain America was rejiggered multiple times, to get what we have now. The Vision is completely different than the one that they created back then. Namor, again, became a villain. So, and even the Angel, completely different. So, yeah, they were around, but they were doing different things. So the Marvel comics that we're reading today are based on the creations from the 60s, even though they borrowed names, or in the case of Namor and Captain America, they did bring those characters forward, but mostly it's all stuff from the 60s. So, all right, one last thing I want to say, and then we're going to call it, but there's again, going back to the Man of Steel versus Superman thing, and they're comparing box office. And it's like, well, if you look at international, Man of Steel still made more money. And that is true. And if you go to Box Office Mojo, and I'm going to do that right now. So, if I could type, and you put in Man of Steel, you see that globally it made, through its run, $670 million. So now we go to Box Office Mojo on another screen, and we put in Superman. And as of right now, and the run's not over, but as of right now, it's made $594 million. So comparing the two, Man of Steel did make $76 million more. But, wait, Dave, not to change the topics, but I really want your thoughts. I've been reading a lot of reputable sources calling FF Box Office a big letdown and making Marvel in trouble. Thoughts? Okay, let me hit that in just a minute, Ed. All right. So, yes. Box office total for Man of Steel, which was in the theaters much longer, is that. But you look at the domestic first thing. Domestically, Man of Steel made $291 million. Superman's already made $340 million. It's the international market that's different. Man of Steel is at $379 million. Superman's at $253 million. So there's $120 million difference. But when you roll down into the actual numbers, what no one mentions is that there's something missing. China, for one thing. In China, Man of Steel grossed $63 million. There is no listing for China under Superman To the best of my knowledge, Superman didn't open in China. That means one of the largest markets of international box office is off the table. $63 million is what Man of Steel made. Now, go back to Man of Steel, Russia. Russia brought in $10 million. No Russia for Superman. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Under the Asia Pacific, which in China, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 countries for Man of Steel. In that same area, there's only 7. There are 5 countries that did not open Superman, which was close to $100 million. Kind of brings those numbers into different perspective when you look at it that way. Also, you got to throw in the fact that Man of Steel was coming off the high of Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins series. Superman's coming off the low of The Flash and Black Adam. So the fact that it did as well as it did is pretty amazing. It's been profitable. It needed to do enough to reestablish the DC characters in the theaters, and I think it's done that. So we're not comparing apples to apples at this point. There are different places, different times. Nobody is doing as well in the box office after the pandemic as they were doing beforehand. The number of people plus a ticket sale is 5 times. You adjust for inflation, but even adjusted for inflation, a ticket price is about 5 times what it was in 2013. So not as many people are going to the theater, and the cost of the tickets are much more, so they're not going as often. Really hard to compare the two. So I think Man of Steel was a good movie when it came out. I think Superman's a good movie. Just accept it. Stop arguing about it. Okay, let's address Ed's question. Do I think Fantastic Four is a letdown, and do I think Marvel is in trouble? I want to pull up the numbers, and I got to find the correct one because there's a few. Okay. In 4 weeks, Fantastic Four has made $247 million domestically, $221 million internationally, for $468 million globally. All right. We're in a different era for Marvel, and we're in a different era for movies. The number of movies that are going to do $1 billion is few and far between. But the other thing is that there is a lot of negativity towards Marvel because they had a run of less than good movies. Thunderbolts is a good movie. Okay. Captain America Brave New World, not nearly as good. I won't call it bad, but there's some problems with it. Fantastic Four kind of needed to do that same thing. You know, Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four, it's not like there's an excitement to go see these movies in the general populace because A, nobody knew what the hell Thunderbolts was. And when they looked at the poster, they saw, aren't those the sidekick characters? Aren't those the the supporting characters in these other movies? And then with Fantastic Four, it's like, really? You're going to try this again? You know, we went to the Jessica Alba, Michael Chiklis movies. We saw 2 of them, and they were okay. And then there was the Tim Story, or whatever the guy is, not Tim Story. There was the Josh Trank Fantastic Four movie, which was horrible. Why would we want to try again? Why would we want to go to the theaters to see Fantastic Four again? So I think that's what Marvel is dealing with. But when you look at the reviews and the people who have seen the movie, it gets good response. Everybody is saying it's a good movie. It's just not doing that well in theater because I think people are gun shy of movies now. You know, they're not, it's not like it used to be. Do you remember when you were younger and you would call up your friends and go, hey, want to go to the movies? Yeah, what's playing? And then you would go to the newspaper or you'd call the phone number or you'd look up online, depending on how old you are, and you'd go, oh, this is playing at this time, that's playing at that time. Oh, well, let's go see that one. And it wasn't so much the movie. A lot of times it was just the going out. It was just going to the theater. Those days, no one does that anymore. You know, when was the last time you just wanted to go to the theater? It didn't matter what movie it was. You know you did that when you were younger. You saw some movies you never would have seen because, we got there and it was the only thing playing, so we saw it. Yeah. Or one person in the group wanted to see it. We all wanted to go to the movie, so we went. You know, that's how I saw The Piano. Why on earth would I go see The Piano? There's a bunch of movies like that. But no intentions of why I would go to it. But I went because I was going with a group, is what we were doing. So I think it's just a different era. And I think people were burned by the last few Marvel movies and the last few DC movies. And I think it's because people just aren't spending the money. And look at the economy, for God's sakes. You know, if a movie ticket is $20 or $24 or whatever it is where you are, it's like $24. When I saw Superman, I went to the matinee and still paid like $12 a ticket on Half Price Tuesdays or whatever it was. So people are a little gun shy. But what's going to happen is they're going to, right now, people are watching Superman at home. And they're going, hey, this was better than I thought. James Gunn posted about that he's getting a bunch of messages or, people tagging him on social media going, Superman's way better than I thought it was. I wish I would have seen it in the theater. I think that's what's going to happen with Fantastic Four. It'll come out on video, Blu-ray, Disney Plus, and people are going to be like, wow, this was really good. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think there needs to be a couple just genuinely good movies. Thunderbolts, Superman, Fantastic Four. Those three in a row, I think, are going to make people a little more willing to go to the theater again. And I think that's what needs to happen. So as long as Gunn and Feige make sure that they're just putting out the best they can, it'll turn back around. So I don't think Marvel's in trouble from, they're going to stop. You know how many studios would love for a movie to make 500 million? 600 million? So I don't see them stopping anytime soon. They would need some disastrous numbers. Like if that's the numbers for Avengers Doomsday, then you can say Marvel's in trouble. But you're bringing back Robert Downey Jr., you're bringing in all the big names, and from the rumor is we're going to hear even more names that are going to be in it. So, yeah. I'm not worried about Marvel right now. I think the biggest problem Marvel had was a guy named Bob Chapek taking over Disney and demanding quantity over quality. And they let him go. And we're seeing the end of that era. And we're seeing stuff now like uh, how they changed Daredevil, Born Again, how Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four. This is the return to quality over quantity. So as long as they keep doing that, I think they'll be fine. So, do you think it's too soon for or not for digital releases on these movies? Um, you know, my opinion's still out on that one. I looked at Superman going, yeah, it's a little early to release it, but then they still made a couple $1 million this weekend at the theater, on par for what they should have made. So the people that wanted to see it in the theater are still seeing it in the theater, and the people who are watching it at home weren't going to go to the theater. So it's a gamble, and it's an interesting gamble because Gunn wants people to be able to see Superman before Peacemaker comes out. So I get that, and it's an interesting way to look at it. But yeah, so I mean, Superman still made $3 million this weekend at the theater in its sixth week at the box office. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. Let's see. Just out of curiosity, domestic. Oh no, they made about $5 million this weekend, and that's weeks 36 through 30, or days 36 through 38. And Man of Steel at that same time made under 2 million. Friday was 500,000, Saturday was 750,000, Sunday was 570. So they're pulling in 1.4 million on Friday, 2.2 million on Saturday, 1.6 million. So no, the people that want to see Superman in the theater are still going to see Superman in the theater. But now you've got people who don't want to go to the theater, whether it's because they physically can't, or they don't want the crowds, or whatever it is. Now they're seeing it. So yeah, I think it's okay. I don't know what Marvel's going to do. They're still 2 weeks behind on Fantastic Four, but it'll probably be their normal 45-day thing, but we'll see. Anthony says, I'm not sure if you've been reading it, but a lot of people say the current absolute Martian Manhunter is basically the closest thing right now to Shade the Changing Man from Vertigo Comics. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I will see if I can get a copy and talk about it next time if I can. So, Triple B says, I went to go see Red Sonja in the theater for $15 and loved it. Oh, I am so happy to hear that. Thank you, Triple B. My connection to Dynamite. Nick's a good friend. I do work for them on and off, but I wanted this movie to be good. The fact that it was only on one night blew my mind. I haven't had a chance to see it. I will watch it on digital. But to hear that it's good, and that's what other people are saying too. Rich Johnston over at Bleeding Cool, who I used to work with, he said that it was just a good sword and sorcery movie. Somebody else I said that the similar thing, that if you're a fan of like Conan and the sword and sorcery movies from the 80s and 90s, this is right up there. So I'm looking forward to it. Anthony says, I've been saying this and people don't want to hear it. These movie studios are not really caring about the traditional box office anymore because they know they can make it up in digital and PVOD. I think there was a movement towards that, but I think there was a backlash. And that way of thinking is coming back around. HBO tried it during the pandemic. Disney tried it during the pandemic. And it didn't work. Mortal Kombat, Suicide Squad, Black Widow, um, Wonder Woman 1984 were all released on video on demand at the same time they were in theaters, and none of them did as well. So I think they're going away from that. So, but there was that big movement towards it. And he says, let's not forget that movie watching trends have changed. A lot of people have been waiting for movies to go out on streaming because, in general, movie studios have conditioned them to do so. Yeah, that's another good point. So, I went to every Marvel movie until the pandemic hit, and then I went to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and then I went to Superman, and that's what I've been doing. That's my movie going. And I literally had not been to any theater at all since Quantumania. And before that, I saw Malignant of all movies. So, Jay, hey, good to see you, Jay. The trailer made it look like an early 2000 movie, and I mean that in the best way. Excited to see it. Yeah, I am too. I can't wait to see Red Sonja. And it says, Red Sonja, it was odd that they were only going to have it in theaters one night. Why a Wednesday? Why not Saturday? Just seemed odd. Because distribution deals are very difficult, and they had to fight like hell just to get it in theaters for a night, because the movie theaters want the biggest movies possible, and Red Sonja didn't have a gigantic budget with a gigantic marketing budget, so they were able to convince some theaters to put it out for a night. Now, if their per theater does well, they might get more. I don't know. I don't know what the plan is, but that's the only way I could see them getting a bigger release. But we'll see. And says, I'm not sure if you've seen all the drama that was happening, that a scooper is threatening James Gunn, that he's going to, yeah. I saw that. That's Schneider. And you know what? He needs to shut up. What James Gunn did is perfectly fair and I think needed. There are people who are making money on rumors and scoops that half the time turn out to be false, and they do this because it gets clicks and it gets them money. They've made this cottage industry in trying to spoil the movies, and in doing so, they're ruining things for the fans. If you go into a movie and some insider said, oh, Deadpool's going to be in this along with Mr. Sinister, and you get in there and you watch the movie and there's no Deadpool and there's no Mr. Sinister, you're going to go, well, damn it, why did Marvel do that? And Marvel never had an intention of putting Deadpool or Mr. Sinister in the movie. Snyder said it was in there. Or My Time to Shine. Or Can We Have Some Toast? They said it. No verification, no confirmation, and then they'll come out later and go, well, we heard that Deadpool was cut at the last minute. We heard that this character was going to be in it. It's like Snyder came out and said Robin is going to be in the Batman Part 2. And what James Gunn did was he came out and he said 6 people have read the script total. There's nobody there to leak it. And I'm assuming those 6 people are Matt Reeves and his assistant, or his co-writer, James Gunn, Peter Safran, probably Robert Pattinson, and maybe Colin Farrell, or, I don't know. I don't think it's crew members. I don't think it's anybody that would leak. So where is he getting this information from? How do you verify it? How do you prove it? So the fact that James Gunn called him out, and didn't call him out by name, he just said, only 6 people have read this script. Don't believe that stuff. And that's how it should be. And the truth is, do you really want movies ruined? Do you really need that information? It's one thing to speculate when they come out and they say, oh, this guy, the Hulk is going to be in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Well, then if you want to sit around and go, is it going to be Intelligent Hulk? Are we going to get Savage Hulk back? Why is he going to be in the movie? What way? Punisher is going to be in there. Is Punisher going to fight the Hulk? See, those are the stories we've gotten. We've gotten from pretty reputable companies or reputable sites that are usually right. Again, may not be true, but at least the reputation of those sites are pretty good. But if Spider-Man Brand New Day comes along and Punisher's not in it, there's going to be a lot of people that are really disappointed. And what if Marvel had never intended for Punisher to be in it? There was no script that had Punisher in it. So, yeah, Jeff Snyder needs to shut up. You want to make your money, you want to go out there and get your clicks, go right ahead. But if somebody comes back at you and calls you out on your BS, you got no ground to stand on. Either tell us who leaked it, show us your evidence. But it's really easy to go, well, I'm going to leak a bunch of stuff and I've got this. Okay, prove it. Because you got called out. He told you didn't. Prove it. So, the only date I recognized was Robert Sheehan. I don't get that reference, Jay. Oh, only star I recognized was Robert Sheehan. Okay. Makes sense. You're the man. That's why I had. Okay. Anthony says, but the issue is fans let the speculation become expectation. Exactly. That's what I was just talking about. It becomes expectation, then they're disappointed when it doesn't do what the scoopers said it would do. And I've seen that in a lot of Marvel's movies lately. Like, look, Marvel put out the movie they want to put out, not because that's what the scooper wanted. So, and the most exciting part of Brand New Day for me is seeing the interplay with Frank and Peter, with Peter trying to stop Frank from killing people. That will be, that I agree with you, that will be great if that's what we end up getting. Again, the confirmation comes from like Variety and stuff like that, really reputable sites. And, oh, well, no, we've actually seen on-set stuff now, too. So, great. But again, Marvel hasn't come out and told us, so they could cut all that. They didn't make it official. Jay said, and the van, yeah. I always say rumor has it, or take it with a grain of salt unless it's verified by Gunn or Feige. Exactly. If it's not from the top, let it go. And Gunn is great about coming out and setting the record straight. Almost to the point where I wish he would just hire somebody. Hey, Kevin Feige, James Gunn. Let me be your anti-scooper, okay? Just put me in contact with somebody in the studio, in both studios, and that I can run a rumor by, and they can say no, or yeah, or no comment. And then I can go out and say, studio sources say that rumor is BS. You know, studio sources do not comment on that particular rumor. Studio sources say that rumor is 100% true. I'd do that. I'd do a show a day. 5 o'clock, wrap-up day. Rumor rundown. So, all right. Let's finish this up here. Hydra Yo, Triple B. Dan, my theory for Batman 2, and this is just my theory, and my gut feeling is two villains are going to be the Court of Owls and either Argus or Checkmate. I feel the Court of Owls may be too soon. I think it needs more setup. If we get Court of Owls, I think that'll be in the third Batman movie, Batman Part 3. I think Hush is more likely. But again, that's speculation. You're speculating, I'm speculating. If I show up in Court of Owls, I'm going to enjoy the movie either way. If it's Hush, I'm going to enjoy the movie either way. That's all I care about. So, what Jay says. Let's put that one on the screen. Hire Dan to write Green Arrow or Daredevil movie, you cowards. All right. I think that's going to wrap up the show right there. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. It's been great. I'll be back next week. Come up with a topic, anything you guys want to hear about. You can drop me a line during the week. Otherwise, then I'll be back and have more to talk about. I'll give you an update on Obsidian Moon. Just so you know, the first third of Chaos Game is written off to my editor, who will do her magic, Salome Jones. She'll send it back to me. I'll make all the changes and then be moving on. So Chaos Game is coming. So, all right, guys, have a great night. Dan needs to write Reacher comics. Oh, I would absolutely love to write that. Yeah, Friday nights when Nick is on the show, everybody needs to go onto Nick's show and just put it on blast that Dynamite needs to get the rights to Reacher and that I need to write it. Nick will love that. I'll get a call. All right, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday. Take care. Be safe.